Welcome to this explainer. Okay, we're just going to skip the slow intros today, right? Because we have something absolutely fascinating to uncover. We're diving straight into the secret biological engine that literally drives almost all of human behavior. You might think you know exactly what motivates you. Maybe it's success, money, or freedom, but, well, underlying all of that whole shebang is this hidden architecture that we almost never talk about. So I want you to ask yourself a deeply personal question. Why do we care so much about what other people think? I mean, we all love to believe we're these entirely independent thinkers, right? We walk around saying things like, I do what I want, or I don't care what people think of me. But is that actually true? Think about it. Why do we dress a certain way, or, hide certain opinions? Or why do we get that awful pit in our stomach when a text message is just left unread? Let's challenge that illusion of total independence right here, right now. Okay, let's really dive into this. Think about the stark contrast between our physical survival needs and our invisible psychological ones. Yes, obviously, as biological creatures, we absolutely need food, water, sleep, and physical safety. That's a given. But human beings are hardwired with this intense, primal hunger for something far less visible: social connection. You see, a human doesn't just wake up and ask, hey, do I have enough to eat today? Unconsciously, we're constantly asking, do I belong here? Am I respected? Am I actually being seen? And this brings us to a really foundational concept in psychology. Back in 1995, psychologists Roy Baumeister and Mark Leary introduced what they called the need to belong hypothesis. Their massive review of human behavior basically proved that belonging isn't just some nice-to-have luxury. It's not just a decorative part of our lives. It is a fundamental, absolutely core human requirement. We possess this persistent, undeniable drive to form lasting, positive bonds. In fact, this drive is so deeply embedded that it literally organizes our entire mental life, our attention, our memory, our emotions, and even our judgments. So what happens when that core need is just denied? Well, psychologist Kip Williams studied ostracism, the act of being ignored or excluded. And what he found is that it instantly threatens four basic psychological needs: belonging, self-esteem, control, and a meaningful existence. When you're excluded, it triggers this rapid, existential emergency signal in your brain. It hits your self-esteem by telling you you aren't valuable enough. It threatens your control because, well, you can't force people to include you. And most terrifyingly, it threatens your sense of a meaningful existence. Honestly, this is exactly why being subjected to the silent treatment or being completely ignored often feels so much colder and so much worse than a direct insult. Because an insult at least acknowledges you exist. Silence just feels like social death. And this brilliantly illustrates the biological reality of that social death. Just look at this quote from the American Psychological Association. It's backed up by some incredible fMRI data from researchers Eisenberger, Lieberman, and Williams. They had participants play this virtual ball-tossing game where suddenly they were just excluded from the game. And the brain scans, they showed that the anterior cingulate cortex, which is the exact same region of the brain associated with the distress of physical pain, completely lit up. The brain literally treats social exclusion like a broken bone. And from an evolutionary standpoint, this makes perfect sense, right? For our ancestors, being cast out of the tribe basically meant a massive loss of protection and food. To the ancient brain, rejection doesn't just mean sad feelings, it literally equals physical danger. Keeping that completely primal, biological terror of rejection in mind, I really want you to reflect on your own drives for a second. Let's set aside our evolutionary past and just look at our modern lives. Is ambition really just about the money? I mean, we chase careers, we try to build wealth, we desperately want to be successful. But what are we actually chasing here? Let's reframe how we look at the pursuit of wealth. Sure, money obviously has material power. It buys food, shelter, comfort, but it also has an incredibly potent social power. People often chase money not out of simple greed, but to basically buy a shield against the profound pain of low social status. Because poverty isn't just a lack of material goods, it can be intense social suffering. It brings on the vulnerability of being ignored, disrespected, or just totally excluded from opportunities. So when people are out there grinding and chasing wealth, a lot of times they're really just trying to buy dignity, access, and absolute protection from humiliation. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how we can map this belonging motive across almost every single domain of our lives. Think about it. At work, chasing promotions is often less about the job and more about fitting the culture and avoiding being the outcast. In romance, the terrifying fear of aloneness can actually cause people to tolerate terrible treatment simply because losing that bond feels way worse than the dissatisfaction. In politics, we adopt our tribe's views and shame the outgroup. And notice, we don't always do this because of impartial facts, but just to secure our place in the camp. And online life, we carefully curate our images and count likes as this quantified numerical metric of our social worth. So many of our everyday actions are essentially just elaborate masquerades for belonging management. And this leads us to a pretty profound realization about identity itself. Identity is supposed to answer the question, who am I? But for humans, that question is almost always a social one. Our identity is co-authored by our groups. We say, I'm a parent, I'm a teacher, I'm from this neighborhood, I belong to this political side. This, by the way, is exactly why trying to change someone's mind with pure, hard evidence often completely fails. Beliefs aren't just isolated thoughts floating in our heads. They are membership cards. To abandon a belief feels like risking exile from your entire community. We will literally abandon objective facts just to protect our membership in our chosen tribes. But what happens when our membership is completely revoked? Chronic rejection causes some really severe behavioral distortions. Generally speaking, people respond in one of three ways. Step 1 is ambition. And in this context, that means seeking success as a form of revenge. Think of the person who was mocked and decides, you know what? One day I'll prove them all wrong. Step 2 is aggression. This is reacting with intense rage because public shame and humiliation actively lower your status. Humiliation really is the deepest wound. It immediately triggers our identity defense. And then step 3 is withdrawal. This is isolating completely to avoid any future pain, essentially deciding that being visible is simply unsafe. Let's move to and see how this builds into our modern reality. Just compare the ancestral village to the digital age. In the village, your acceptance was based entirely on local, face-to-face relationships. But today, social media totally weaponizes our ancient brains. It turns that primal need for a tribe into this relentless, quantified status anxiety. We aren't just comparing ourselves to a small village anymore. We're comparing our messy, behind-the-scenes reality to the polished, algorithmically distributed highlights of millions of strangers. We're taking a biological system built for a tiny tribe and just completely overloading it with constant public ranking. So how in the world do we survive this without losing our minds? Well, we have to clearly distinguish between approval and acceptance. They are not the same thing. Approval means agreeing with everything someone does. But acceptance means valuing someone's core worth despite their flaws. It says, hey, you are one of us. You matter. But because you belong here, we expect something from you. The absolute healthiest environments for human growth combine this deep, genuine warmth with high responsibility. It's correction without the humiliation. So the crucial point is really understanding the difference between these two types of belonging. Enslaving belonging demands complete conformity, silence, or literally erasing who you are just to stay in the group. If you depend completely on this kind of belonging, you become a prisoner of your own reputation, just constantly performing for an audience. Healthy belonging, on the other hand, provides attachment and care, but it actually permits individuality and dissent. We have to be so careful in choosing our tribes so we don't end up empty inside just to look successful on the outside. You need belonging for sure, but you also need a backbone. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought. The next time you feel a massive surge of ambition, or a sudden flash of anger over a slight, or even just the sting of a social media post, I want you to look beneath the surface. Ask yourself, are you just hungry for bread? Or are you actually hungry for a place in the tribe? Understanding this hidden engine isn't going to make the need magically disappear, but it will give you the power to choose who you actually belong to. Thanks for exploring this with me today.